Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and it's Billboard Breakdown. Okay, so as you all can probably see, this episode of Billboard Breakdown is a little bit late. This is because of President's Day in the United States, another holiday that extends the chart week a little bit, and considering that the Grammys happened, it also seemed to have the peculiar impact of blunting their overall impact on the Hot 100, at least in the way that I had expected. Now, that didn't mean that the Grammys didn't cascade through here, we'll get to those impacts, but it also meant that we got yet another overloaded week full of changes. Expect another long episode, so let's not waste any more time. Our top 10. Now, as I expected, Shape of You by Ed Sheeran easily holds the number one for another week, thanks to dominance on sales and YouTube, and finally clinching that top spot on radio, and much to my surprise, it's showing no signs of slowing down anytime soon. And that's not a good sign for I Don't Want to Live Forever by Zayn and Taylor Swift, which muscled back a little bit on sales, and while it has good streaming and airplay traction, it might be far too behind to make a lot of headway without an extended buffer like YouTube, which is kind of weakened. And none of this is good news for Bad and Bougie by Migos featuring Lil Uzi Vert back to number 3. Yes, it has huge streaming, it's leading there, but the sales are not strong and it seems to have peaked on the radio, which is not promising for maintaining viability if streaming starts to slip a little bit. And it also has some real competition thanks to a big debut in our top 5 at number 4, Chained to the Rhythm by Katy Perry and Skip Marley. Outside of that flop Olympics single Rise, it's been a while since I've talked about Katy Perry in depth, so with this being the lead-off single, I'm kind of curious where the album will go. But it's here because she got monstrous radio traction and considerable sales. Not quite streaming or YouTube yet, but just give it some time there. Now this leads to a surprising, record-breaking return for the top 5 in Closer by the Chainsmokers featuring Halsey, for the most number of weeks that any song has ever spent in the top 5 of the Billboard history. And look, I'm not gonna say I'm happy that they got the record over Mark Ronson or LeAnn Rimes, but I'm not all that surprised. Even though it's bleeding airplay and sales are pretty weak, it's always had strong YouTube and streaming to prop it up. And Bad Things by Machine Gun Kelly and Camila Cabello had an even worse week here. It might have a little bit more residual airplay, but both streaming and sales are weaker. I'm not surprised that it fell down to number 6. But then we have our second big top 10 entry, That's What I Like by Bruno Mars at number 7. Riding huge momentum that got a giant boost thanks to the Grammys and sales, it roared up those charts and starting to get some airplay and streaming traction. I foresee this maybe having some serious staying power down the road. And then we get our third new top 10 entry, Love on the Brain by Rihanna at number 8. It's taken a while for this to get here, to the point where the radio momentum is actually starting to slow down, and it's got no significant streaming or sales, but just enough around a bunch of other categories in order to get there. And this takes us to our fourth new top 10 entry, I Feel It Coming by The Weeknd featuring Daft Punk. Now, I actually think this might have more traction than Rihanna. It got here thanks to a sales boost and plus the Grammys, but it's got a little bit more streaming and radio beneath it, and while the growth is slow, it hasn't slowed down yet, all which I think is a promising sign because, yeah, I like this song. Finally, clinging on to the top 10, we have Bounce Back by Big Sean, which is here because of strong streaming and better radio than I had expected. It'll be interesting to see how long this will actually manage to stick around, let alone the top 10. But on a different note, our losers and dropouts. And wow, this week was a doozy. Outside of all the expected Big Sean losses, we actually had some considerable dropouts, like 80s Mercedes by Maren Morris, How Far I'll Go by Ali Cravalho, Hand Clap by Fitz and the Tantrums, Don't Let Me Down by the Chainsmokers featuring Dea, and in a particularly bad week for Sia, both Cheap Thrills of Sean Paul and The Greatest with Kendrick Lamar, they're both gone. And while the list of our losers is a little bit less dramatic, it's still considerable, with Million Reasons by Lady Gaga falling off the return to 18, No Favors by Big Sean and Eminem falling hard to 63, and Believer by Imagine Dragons down to 66, both the latter off their debuts last week. Now the remaining 3, they seem to be exiting a little bit before their time, with Seeing Red by Dustin Lynch slipping down to 65, Chantier by Shakira and Maluma down to 78, and unfortunately, Way Down We Go fulfilling its titles by Khaled down to its 81. And yet, when I take a look at our returning entries and gains, well, definitely a little bit more of a mixed bag, but there is some promise here. I've already talked about That's What I Like by Bruno Mars going up to number 7, but I'm not about to complain that Sober Saturday Night by Chris Young featuring Vince Gill rising up to 47, or In Case You Don't Know by Brett Young rising off his debut to 75. It's not a bad song. Or especially Castle on the Hill by Ed Sheeran suddenly regaining some momentum up to 52. Definitely promising there. Now the rest though, okay, I Got You by Bebe Rexha up to 43 doesn't really surprise me, and off the EP release it'll probably get even more, but why does anyone want to hear Swang by Ray Shrimmer rise to 57? I get it, it's because of the video, but when you follow it up with Look at Me by Triple X Tentacion up to 74, again, barely below average Bandcamp quality. It doesn't belong in the Hot 100. I will say that on average our returning entries are a little better. Yeah, I'm not really wild about El Amante by Nicky Jam back up to 98, or Sex With Me by Rihanna up to 95, or Black by Dierks Bentley up to 92, but Scared to Be Lonely by Martin Garrix and Dua Lipa, that's a good track, and I'm happy to see it back even if it's only at 100. The big story here though is the complete non-country song of The Fighter by Keith Urban featuring Carrie Underwood smashing up to 53 thanks to the Grammys. And look, I'm sorry, but this was a prime opportunity for Sturgill Simpson to get mainstream traction thanks to his Grammys performance, and yet country radio will not give him the time of day, even despite a far more authentic sound. I mean, seriously, why? Sorry, okay. And regardless of that continued snub that I will never understand, we had a huge week full of new arrivals, so let's get started off with number 96, Hurricane by Luke Combs. Now, as I have said a number of times in the past, it can be very rare for an independent country act to break through in the Hot 100, which is why when artists get a national airtime and stage like at the Grammys, it's a prime opportunity for the radio to now throw support behind them, but I digress. But yet, in this week, our first two entries are both off of indie country labels, with the first being Luke Combs. He's doing it all himself on his own label. He's released 3 EPs thus far, with this being off his 2015 project, only now gaining traction, and yet I can't see it lasting all that long, most because I've heard this brand of too polished bro country a few too many times before. Yes, Combs' rougher vocal tones, they're welcome. And I do like the guitars, they have a little bit more melodic tone, but between the inconsistencies in the vocal production and the blending, what sounds like a talk box on the bridge that did not need to be there, and your standard love-struck hookup in the lyrics, I feel like every element that doesn't detract from the composition here is just completely generic. They're just not all that special. In other words, it's tolerable, it's listenable, but I guarantee I'll forget this in a day, if not less. Number 94, Yeah Boy by Kelsey Ballerini.
I'm trying to keep it cool, but you're making it hard. I'm wishing your arms were wrapping me up tight. Yeah, boy, you're shining, you can't even help it. Yeah, boy, your eyes can make the moon jealous. And if you wanna know if I wanna be a girl tonight, yeah, boy.
Really, Kelsey? You're following Peter Pan with this and not the title track or Secondhand Smoke? You're 4 singles in off your 2015 album, and you drop into a song that sounds this painfully dated 2 years later? And that's not precisely saying that it's bad. The underlying piano adds a good harmony, and the sandy touches off the hook, and the guitar tone is generally pretty agreeable. But between the obviously synthetic and stiff percussion clashing pretty badly against the banjo, Kelsey's pretty but rather inert delivery, and the painfully basic love-smitten lyrics that react as a bro country mirror, it really is a lesser cut from that album. It really is just filler. In other words, I'm not really a fan of this, and she's capable of so much better. Number 93, It Ain't Me by Kygo and Selena Gomez.
Who's gonna rock you when the sun won't let you sleep? Who's waking up to drive you home when you're drunk and all alone? Who's gonna walk you through the dark side of the morning? It ain't me.
So when I initially saw this team up, I was surprised, but the more I think about this pairing, the more it makes sense to me. Both Kygo and Selena Gomez are at their best making breezy, lightweight music that's not required to tax the vocals or the grooves. As such, I had some hopes for this, especially as the gentle, sandy beat picks up off of the acoustic guitar to build into thicker swell in the liquid synths and the electric guitar, the piano, the thicker set of backing vocals for a remarkably sticky hook. Hell, I was even on board with a lot of the lyrics, with Selena reminiscing about an old relationship where she left behind this guy because he kept on staying out all night. She just had enough of all that. And the choppy blend of still discernible vocal snippets during the drop, it almost made a warped sort of sense from the perspective of that guy now fumbling through his reminiscence of her. Now, that's not saying the song isn't kind of flawed. You can tell that Selena's straining herself on that hook, and Kygo's transitions from acoustic to electric instrumentation can feel a little bit clunky, but you know what? I was really surprised how much I really like that hook, and the overall vibe of the song, it works a lot for me. So yeah, I'm not convinced this is a great track by any measure, but you know what? Definitely a good one. I will take this. I enjoyed it. Number 88, Cash Me Outside by DJ Suede, the remix god. Oh, what? I'm sorry. Are you waiting for another meme review to dig into this? You want me to cover a forced normie meme that reeks of redneck gawking derived from, above all else, a cringeworthy snippet from Dr. Phil? Look, I'm not gonna be treading on the turf of the best teeth in the fucking game here, folks. He's got that meme game on lock. And this is a cheaply produced bit of ugly synths, generic trap beats, scratching, an attempt to stretch the sample into something resembling a song. Anybody who listens to this is listening to it ironically. And even then, there are more interesting meme remixes that don't make me want to set everything and anything on fire. Pen, pineapple, apple pen. It at least had the benefit of weirdness and fruit. This is just ugly, forced, and mean-spirited in a way that's not witty, funny, or remotely interesting enough to stick around. In other words, it's worthless. Next, number 87, Rolex by Ayo and T.
Have you looking at it, put you in a trance? I just wanna rollie with a dapper ranch. I already got some designer to hold on my pants. I just want some ice on my wrist so I look better when I dance. Have you looking at it, put you in a trance? Yeah.
You know, there's a part of me that hadn't even considered the possibility that Ray Shremmer would inspire rip-offs, and yet the second I heard this song from these Atlanta brothers, the comparison became obvious and blatant. Not only are they actively mimicking the more melodic, more aggressive vocal duo combination, with voices that seem to be cracking with every other word, but the content is just as completely empty and seems to be falling into the same empty luxury rap, partying, and stealing your girlfriend. And yet, I don't quite hate this as much as I had expected. For one, minus the Mike Will Made It connection, the production is nowhere near as ponderous and swamped out. There are some rough production spots, especially in the vocal pickup balanced out with the bass, but between the piano and the flutes balanced against the slightly more interesting bass kicks and a melodic cadence on the hook that proved surprisingly sticky for me, I can kind of see the appeal. Look, you're not gonna catch me calling this a good song, but if I were to find a version of Ray Shremmer that kind of works for me, well, yeah, sort of like with Black Beatles, I can somewhat get behind this. You know what? It's not that bad. Check it out. Number 85, Every Day by Ariana Grande featuring Future.
He gave it to me. Every day, every day, every day. He gave it to me. Every day, every day, every day. He gave it to me. Every day, every day, every day.
Okay, let's get bluntly honest here. The only reason that Ariana Grande released this song against the far superior Greedy is that it's the Future cosign. And that's because apparently the music industry has discovered that just like with Lil Wayne and Ludacris, a Future verse guarantees some form of success. But again, did it have to be this song? The noisy gurgle of synths that bleed into these blocky pieces that don't complement the trap snares or carry much melody when Future contributes to the same hook mold that Big Sean did on Problem, and subsequently seems to lose a lot of his personality and talent. Because you cannot tell me that Future's non-rhymes on his verses were remotely good or interesting, especially in contrast with Ariana, who was at least trying to sell the possibility of getting sex every day from Future. She's trying to make it sound appealing. And really, she's the only reason why this song is tolerable at all. But you know what? Tolerable isn't a substitute for good. So more often than not, sorry, passing. Number 84, Everything 1K by Kodak Black.
It's a struggle, man, I'm with you all the way. This fall, the soldiers fell victim to the system. Every day that go by, they so close to losing faith. I gotta thank God for everything. It's a miracle how you'll wake up and your dreams right in your face. I woke up in the...
Okay, why is this on the radio? Better question, who in the hell is going to Kodak Black for melancholic stories about prison, no father figures, systemic failures, and poverty? I'm not precisely complaining. The content certainly has more weight than anything Kodak Black has ever tried before. And you know, he's not downplaying the grim seriousness through his more plaintive delivery, the very bleak blend of strings, piano, and organ against a firmer bass line, and even hints of an electric guitar that's kind of muted on the second verse. And while his flow is far from complex with the slower cadence and plain-spoken style, it is framed in a way that doesn't shy away from the reality of the situation. I'm not really sure I enjoy this as a song. If I'm looking for conscious hip-hop, I've got no shortage of artists who can tap into those stories far more effectively. But you know what? There is a place for street-level songs like this, and Kodak Black? Yeah, I'm as surprised as anyone. This is not bad. Solid effort. Definitely support this. Check it out. Number 77, Heroe, Favorito by Romeo Santos.
Si yo fuera el hombre araña por un beso, 100 pies de altura, escalo sin esfuerzo a tu balcón. Y si alguien te pregunta por tu héroe favorito, dile que soy yo.
Okay, time for some context. If you recognize this guy, it's probably because he had a semi-hit back in 2014 on the Drake collaboration Audio. But Romeo Santos has been around for a fair bit longer. Originally, he was the frontman of the band Aventura. He began putting out solo projects and scoring some pretty big names as his guest stars in the early 2010s, with this being a new single, presumably for a new album. And this... okay, one thing that I'm a little bit surprised is that I haven't seen more of this before, in that artists are looking to cash in on the superhero trend in movies. And yet, Romeo Santos here has made an entire superhero-themed song. And make no mistake, the liquid electric Spanish guitar tones, they're pretty smooth, especially against the sharper bass tones and the very prominent rattling textured percussion right at the front of the mix. And yet, while the superhero references, they can't help but feel a little bit cheesy when you translate them from Spanish. I got a good chuckle about the references to Batman's love nest. Seriously. But I do think the larger issue is that Romeo Santos just does not have the voice for this sort of song. His thin, willowy tones, they don't really impress me to begin with, but when you compare it to subject matter that aims for real bombast and swell, you would hope that you would at least have a baritone backing it up. This song, it's kind of frail and jittery, and it comes across more like a fanboy trying to entice a girl using his comic books as his best pool of references to woo her. And considering that I'm used to be, and still kinda am, exactly that kind of dorky, it lends this track an awkwardness that doesn't really work for me. It's a cute idea, to be sure, but man, again, does not work. Number 71, Helium by Sia.
Love lifts me up like helium. Love lifts me up when I'm down, down, down. When I've hit the ground, you're all I need.
So apparently 50 Shades Darker came out and it sucks. A lot, no surprise. But since there was significant cultural amnesia in between this movie and the last god-awful insult to character pacing, BDSM, and decent erotic filmmaking, the soundtrack has managed to land 2 songs on this list, this being the first one. And while I am by no means surprised that Sia contributed to this soundtrack, I'm a little bit exasperated that this song is not better, especially considering Sia used to pull off elegant piano ballads like this pretty damn well back in her indie days. And yet, it appears that all the subtlety has gone out the window, with the thicker squeals of strings, heavier multi-tracking, and the line, even Superwoman sometimes needed Superman's soul. I've read the comics, that was never the case to my view. And you know, I keep banging on about this with 50 Shades, but this song is so sterile and cold and sexless that I have no idea why any musical director or coordinator went in this direction for this sort of erotic drama. There's just no tension here, just a dour, unimpressive melodrama. In other words, it's generally passable, I guess, the tones aren't bad, but every time Sia's voice breaks in the song, I'm reminded why Alive remains her best song in recent years, and certainly not this. Number 62, Shining by DJ Khaled, featuring Beyonce and JayZ.
I've been losing my mind. Oh, hold on, don't try to
Okay, I know that the majority of people would be coming here to this track for Beyonce. Hell, maybe even a few for DJ Khaled. But I was coming to this for JayZ, because outside of a somewhat disconnected verse on I Got the Keys with DJ Khaled, it's been a while since we heard from Jay. And yet there's a part of me that wished that this song did more for all of them put together. For once, DJ Khaled actually produced a song, and the bass-heavy knock of this track does have a decent enough groove against the fragments of the vocal sample, but I can't be the only one who thinks that Beyonce's very flat, kind of disinterested flows don't do a lot for me on this song, even despite fitting into a very comfortable category of I'm awesome anthem for her. But okay, JayZ shows up for a verse, albeit with slightly different vocal production compared to Beyonce, which doesn't help the overall cohesion of the vibe. And the verse, well, it connects for this sort of bragging, but it's also not that interesting or punchy. I know JayZ is capable of better flows and better content. And as it is, the groove is good enough that I can see this getting some airplay and I don't mind it, but I did expect some better from this celebrity couple, particularly from Beyonce, and especially after an incredibly set of performances on Lemonade that were really potent. This, not bad, but I don't really see it sticking with me. Sorry. Number 54, Bom Bidi Bom by Nick Jonas and Nicki Minaj.
You give me bad love, baby. Let me hold on, if you want, baby. Like bom bidi bom 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 bidi bom bidi bom bom bom. 'Cause you're a bad girl, baby. Let me hold on, if you want, baby. Yeah.
Okay, look, I get that the 50 Shades movies tend to pull on some weird territory for some of their featured songs, but in terms of team-ups, this was probably the strangest to me. Nick Jonas makes sense for this sort of dark, kind of edgy, in a pop sort of way, monochromatic style that fits with 50 Shades, but Nicki at her best always had a certain type of manic intensity, and that's about the furthest thing from something in this dour vein. And that's kind of why this song caught me off guard, because from the way it opens with that smoldering dark guitar, it leads into this solid bassy groove. It's got a little bit more grind in the low end. It's almost got a bluesy sort of vibe that I've never really heard Nicki try before, but I really liked it. And considering that she managed to walk the line between manic and sultry on her verse, which, yes, I'll agree with all her fans, way too short, it actually kind of makes this weird combination with the Selena sample and the hook work in a twisted sort of way. If anything, the weakest portion of the song is Nick Jonas. His tones are just too high, thin, and lacking stronger texture for a song with this much low groove and swagger to it. You need someone with a darker brand of soul and some real grit in their voice to really kill this. And a list of artists who could pull it off in the modern day, that's thin indeed. I can kind of see why they had to pull on him. Overall, I like this a lot. If Nicki's gonna be implying she's going back to her older, fast-paced hip-hop style on her next album, yeah, I'm intrigued, I dug it. Number 42, Cold by Maroon 5 featuring Future.
Like I don't know you anymore. I don't understand why you're so cold to me. With every breath you breathe, I see there's something going on. I don't understand why you're so cold.
I wish I was surprised by this. It's not the first time that Maroon 5 has collaborated with a hip-hop artist. As much as I want to forget that Payphone and Wiz Khalifa ever existed, I can't. But I'll say right at the gate that this was a collaboration that I was dreading. Because make no mistakes, the only things that Maroon 5 and Future have consistently had in common is that now they're making monotonous as hell mainstream music, and both frontmen are total assholes. So great, after the turd of Don't Wanna Know, Maroon 5's newest single has even less groove or indication that this group was once a funk rock band instead of a bass and reverb saturated percussion over melody pop slurry that you might be able to pick out a guitar groove out of the hook if you really squint for it. And of course, it's the sort of song where Adam Levine and Future are bitching about some girl giving them the cold shoulder even though they have tons of sex, because that's what you want to hear on a Valentine's Day release. But the real issue here is Future. I don't know who did his vocal production, but Future at his best in this low, fast-paced, aggressively dark range. So why in the nine hells does he sound slightly pitched up, nasal more than usual, and lacking consistent auto-tune on his verse? It's a bafflingly poor choice, and providing ample evidence that working with Adam Levine brings out the absolute worst in any rapper. Yeah, surprising nobody, this song sucks in a mostly unspecific, miserable sort of way. Generic and soulless, but somehow incompetent to boot. In other words, skip it. And finally, number 4, Change of the Rhythm by Katy Perry featuring Skip Marley.
Turn it up, keep it on repeat. Stumbling around like a wasted zombie. Yeah, we think we're free. Drink, 'cause one's on me. We're all chained to the rhythm, to the rhythm, to the rhythm.
So So this is the big one. Katy Perry's big comeback single where she wants to make a statement about the world. And look, anybody who's followed Katy Perry's writing collaborators in the years since Prism, to say nothing of her more strident political opinions last year, nobody should be surprised by this. A big reverb-saturated slice of 80s disco with a drowned-out guitar lick against the sandy percussion, with Katy Perry talking about people living in a bubble, locked in a little utopia of their own lives, chained to mindless dance grooves in which she herself used to crank out, oh wait. See, I don't mind it when artists get political, and I'll even give Katy Perry a little bit of credit for pulling on Skip Marley for a reggae-inspired bridge, which if it wasn't an immediate stab at modern trends, it would be an interesting choice. The bridge is otherwise pretty good. But you know what, it's part of the problem. The song feels incredibly cynical and calculated to me, not from Katy Perry's point of view or her delivery, but from Max Martin and Sia and their production team that knows exactly what's playing to modern woke awareness, and that'll win over an audience who won't remember how much of Katy's own music flirted with the wrong side of tastelessness. Anybody remember This Is How We Do? And the bitterness that rings through in the writing and the verses is not a tone that'll help, especially when this seems to be more of a song commiserating for one's own blind refusal to listen or break out of the bubble. Newsflash, Katy Perry, your self-pity really doesn't feel all that compelling right now in, reality. And while you could make a credible argument for Katy Perry being entirely the wrong messenger here, I would have no problem if this message was done well. Look at Kodak Black in this very episode. The problem isn't Katy Perry delivering the message, more the message is just poorly sketched and badly done. And on a musical level, kind of myopic and nowhere close to her best material. It's not precisely bad, let's be fair about that. I appreciate the effort, but this is pretty mediocre, and honestly, hope it dies out pretty fast. And that was our long week, and wow, lots to consider. And yet, I think our best and worst of the week is pretty straightforward, with the good stuff going to It Ain't Me by Kygo and Selena Gomez, with the honorable mention to Bum Bidi Bum by Nick Jonas and Nicki Minaj. The worst, you know what, I almost want to disqualify Cash Me Outside as more meme than song, but it really is unlistable as a song, with Cold by Maroon 5 and Future as our dishonorable mention. Overall, this week, kinda all over the place, and I have no idea what's coming up next except for, oh great, likely more Future, because he decides to drop 2 albums in the space of a week. Perfect, just dandy. But we'll see what happens then. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Billboard Breakdown on Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.